Bravo, wonderful. This is such a famous piece. Sometimes it's hard to wrap our heads around it and still say something new after so many recordings, right? And so it's really difficult. Maybe we can approach this a little bit from the standpoint of tempo organization. It's a bit tricky. He starts with presto, that being written in large letters, right? So that is the real main tempo of this piece. And yet there are all these wonderful modifiers that are used in the Romantic period. Some pertaining to the character, but the tempo is not, I find the tempo is like a suitcase. If your musical ideas are concentrated, and there are a lot of them, it's like you are packing more things into that suitcase. It becomes heavier, and so you can't quite run, you can't quite walk as fast. And also sometimes you may need a larger suitcase because you have so much that you put into it, right? So it becomes a bit, and sometimes if you pack light, if you streamline your musical ideas, and in other words, if one doesn't have too much to say, then the suitcase becomes a carry-on, right? So in some ways, the tempo is related to the content. It is not something that we can decide a priori. It's not something that we can set first, you know, as in fact the whole idea of let's set a metronome and let's set a goal to reach this. It's quite strange because it really depends on so many factors. For example, the word con anima, with soul. There is that wonderful video of Arthur Rubinstein who claims that he even asked Einstein, Marie Curie, what does it mean with soul? What is the soul? And nobody could answer him. It's really something that he was obviously investigating because he played a lot of music of Chopin, and he writes con anima. So obviously this pertains to the character. Con anima is on this this beautiful theme. It pertains to the character of the theme, to the sound quality perhaps, to it's telling the performer to pour all his or her soul into this beautiful theme, but it modifies the tempo. It adds a layer that, you know, it adds an additional scarf to that suitcase. It makes it a little heavier, a little slower perhaps, right? So, and in fact, it comes after the poco ritenuto, when it does, which prepares the con anima. Then there are words such as dolce, which refer to the, it's still interesting that this is con anima. That's con anima. This dolce. But they obviously have a different meaning, and it's not very specific what that meaning is, but he bothered to write that. So it's almost as though he's telling each performer to try to find, you know, his own meaning out of these indications. Then, of course, he doesn't tell us when the, you know, if there was a tempo modifier, when do we return to tempo 1? Probably when you're done with the... Right in this place, I think we are going back to the presto. There are other indications. Sostenuto, when it has the A major section, right? The so we have the sostenuto there. Sustain the vocal line or sustain your suitcase? Sustain the tempo. What is it? I think in some ways it's both, but definitely it's calmer, and this piece is based on contrast. So contrast can also be caused by the quality of sound, by registers in you know, different writing of the composer, different texture, supported by a tempo that although it's not too distant perhaps from the presto, it must somewhat change shape according to the musical material. The word espressivo also may have something to do, and the word leggero perhaps it's a bit different in that context, but definitely animato, right? This passage, for example, is one of the famous, I find, errors in music history. Somebody one day started with very fast. And every pianist in the rest of the world copied it. Because Chopin never wrote to play that. In fact, the only person who doesn't do that probably is Christian Zimmermann, who starts much more slowly and evolves out of that, as Chopin writes, light, and then later crescendo et animato. And so you increase the excitement near the end of the passage. So by looking at all these modifiers, we have to see also how distant they are from the beginning. Naturally, the end of the piece gets more excited. He writes, sempre con fuoco. The best part is, where was the fuoco where was the fire in the first place? Because he didn't tell us that, right? But then he says, always with fire. But I thought there was, probably because initially he writes, when he writes this, right there is agitato. So, and some of this terminology was perhaps interchangeable. So when you get agitated if you have a fire in the kitchen, for sure. So then it continues to, to say sempre con fuoco, and then the word calando, which has a difficult connotation here. In the early Romantic period, it only meant diminuendo, without slowing down. But in the later Romanticism, apparently calando started being associated, and Brahms makes it even more specific in his writing, with diminuendo and also a slowing down of the tempo. Clearly, he may have meant that because he then writes smorzando. Smorzando, the smorzatori are the dampers. So you dampen the sound, and here smorzando means really getting softer and softer. Finally, to sottovoce. All of these are more dynamic indication. But you have done the late Romantic version. It's very difficult. There is no traffic light in which we know, oh, now it's late Romantic, so it means diminuendo and slowing down. Whereas earlier, it was just diminuendo. We don't really know exactly when that moment that happened. We just learn it only because we have noticed that other composers have clarified these symbols and have shown us that sometimes calando, there was also not only the diminuendo, but it was calando rallentando. They were, very clear about that. So this is certainly an interpretation that's viable, what you did to slow down, etc. And then the end of the piece, definitely, it gets to più mosso, the moment of right that place is obviously più mosso. It gets stretto, so narrowing the suitcase. Being lighter means you can run faster, you have less weight, right? You are more agile. And then ends with the più mosso. So that's the general idea. How does that translate into what we do? Well, now we're going to have to approach it also, it's pretty hard, right? We have to approach it also with certain details, such as, I don't want to spend the whole master class on the beginning, which was what Chopin used to do. The student never left the lesson with more than, because he was never happy. He kept saying, it should sound like a question, and the answer being that, right? But I think that when I ask a question, if I want an answer, I need to be clear in my question. And I think in this case, it's the... Can you try to start with only two notes like this? Yes. Maybe if you raise slightly, basically it's the speed of the finger. But let's say that I park a track against the piano, and then I move the piano. Do you hear a bump? Does it make a sound? No, it only makes the sound of moving the instrument. If I am a bit distant and I go forward, I will bump into the piano and you will hear a loud crashing sound. So the distance is what permits speed to exist. So if we want to start with clarity, we need a little distance between the long note and the next note. So the finger that plays the second note has to be slightly higher to snap a little. Yes. Yes, and then you put maybe 3 of these. You put yes. Yes. And then all of this should be conveyed with the choreography of the gesture, which is this. Try one time mute on the keyboard by doing this. So you move the fingers, but you also have this gesture, and you do it in time, so you do. That's it, that's it. 1, 2. So the arm, the whole kinesthetic feelings, don't even look at your finger. Look up and feel the freedom in the gesture. Then you start putting in the notes. Without the first note, which is the hardest, I think it's this. Yes, so without falling on the first, but falling like a leaf falls. There it is, the first one, not the second. Yes, you heard it, right? We should hear a distance between, they are very fast sounds, but we should hear a certain distance in between, what they call jeu perlé. It's almost like a staccato, but it's not, like a, play staccato one time. Yeah, and then, you know, famous exercise of Chopin for his student was that of playing, say, and then gradually go from that staccato to, until he taught them to the legato, right? So he always taught this, at least these 3 types, and I think this has to have that clarity. Bravo, very good, very good. And of course there is the, because we are in, that's about right. And we have to learn to do it with the pinky and the thumb. Some people play a little too long, but I think, yes. Good, now that's helpful because you begin with a left to right motion. But when you play the long note, you don't have that privilege, right? So how do you do that? You have, it means that the first note maybe shouldn't be stuck like that. It should, you can play and then start moving on the note like this, and then you are 1, yeah. So you play and you move right, which brings you to the left. Good. Now we have 4 of these. We have, the second is, gets a little bigger, right? To the point that you have to arpeggiate. The third, again, is the same, so it's a repetition. But then we have this that's more dramatic, because from here, it goes down, but it goes to. So in our recording, in the spectrum that, you know, that we see visually, that one should have a bigger wave. And you have to kind of keep in your ear the idea of how much power I have for. And again, the same, but I think we need a bit more for the third one. Can you play them in sequence? Sometimes, you know, what happens in the narrative, there are a lot of elements that are disturbing. You know, they draw our attention. They're not disturbing, they just simply draw us in. And we forget where we start and the main points. So if you sometimes skim over all these things and try to address one problem at a time, you teach your ear these different layers. Could you start again from here? And then you play the next one. We skip. Okay. Good, look, this is a very quick movement. what you did. It's like the kitty, you know, it's a feline type of feline movement. I think we need more of this, like you're playing a gong, but slower also. You see the sound? That's it. Beautiful. Now play the next. Good. Enjoy your can be a little slower. Good. And then again the same. Now. Yes, there should be definitely a certain difference. So if the difference means to give more to the right hand, a little less, I mean, I would say there are 3 octaves. I would give more to the top 2, as if he rewrote this, an octave in the right hand and a single note in the left, like this, and then. The last one instead is, yeah, if one could rewrite, it would, but I think you can when you practice, so you can, for the purpose of teaching your ear what's most comfortable. That has more space. Yeah. Okay. So number 1, keeping the rhythmic organization together by virtue of counting the pauses more correctly. You had a little bit too much freedom perhaps in there. And then keeping the organization of the dynamics so that it's absolutely clear what the climax is. And it's the end of this statement. Why? Because after this moment we have a different texture. You know, the music starts moving more in 8th notes, whereas in the beginning it's more quarter notes, because even this, it's a quarter. That's what it is. Okay, can we try one more time the whole beginning based on this now? One. And two, one. Good. And one more now. That's good. That's very good. Yeah, it's much better, much better. It's more organized. And so if we miscount the pauses too much and we let it go like this, it's something that looks like a shape becomes a little bit, you know, it spills over into something else. Next is perhaps the amount of time required from tom, ding, maybe the second could be just a little bit more, and the last one is the most. That also creates this sense of expectation that the climax is there. It's both, of course, bass and top, but it's the stretch that you go on a journey to finally get to here, you know, that there is tension, physical, not physical, but emotional tension that goes on here. Then there comes this beautiful passage, which is different from the con anima that follows. So, and all of this is extremely motivic. It's interesting. We all enjoy this piece in the beginning, but if we are looking for a melody, it's this. It's one of those short, captivating tunes like John Williams would write in Star Wars or something. It's very simple in a way. And so this simplicity works very well once the pauses are doing what they're supposed to do. If we cut them short, sometimes it loses that equilibrium and that organization. Could you play one more time from me? That's a hard one, right? Yes. Try. Yeah, more. It's like the B minor sonata has these. You have to accompany the movement a little bit. Yes. Imagine, because you're not using the traction on the key, so imagine that you pull a little bit the finger, the fingertip, like, almost like a slide. You see this feeling of the finger. Yes. Better, yeah, that's what you should use. Even for this, when you end, feel the traction on the, otherwise, try. Even this as a gesture, remember this gesture of this as, yes. And by the way, these decrescendos, when there are too many in sequence, now we know that perhaps they are not intended to mean decrease the sound, but it's a form of written rubato. So in other words, start a little slower, then when it gets smaller, when the symbol gets smaller, it's faster. So kind of, right. Yes, without accent. So play 2 notes at least, like this. Then accelerate. And then, careful though, you have strings that are true. There is 1 and then 3 here, but they're very thick in the bass. This one needs 3, and they have this much space to resonate. So a little less left hand and more. A little. Try to hit the tops. Try. Good, and since you have the pedal, no need to do 3, go to 5. You can, actually, this will give you a gesture that of playing a gong. You don't go like that and you hold it, right? But you bypass, so maybe... Yes. Good. Also, by the way, stay away from the fulcrum. This, you get less sound. Try to play at the edge of the... Oh, but now you don't need, you can... And by the way, maybe, you see this, this is the difficult stuff, not here. So orient your body more this way, so you can... Good. And... And this one, Chopin writes very difficult accompaniment, always, where you write all this stuff in the sonata in B minor, you know, with the left hand jumping all over. It's so difficult. So this, it's so easy to play accent, so I think that's the one where you have to focus your primary attention, is the left hand in terms of making it a carpet of sound that creates both. There is a certain rhythmic agility, but there are the colors of... This is quite a long melody, because the way he writes the slurs that are very long. So I would recommend practicing with chords in the left hand, like... Sorry, go on. Can you try one time? Wow. That was a journey. Ooh, okay. Now you try with chords if you can. Continue. Continue. Maybe here. Ah. There you go. That's the first journey, right? And then he repeats with octaves, so it's more intense, which means this should be very light. Can you try with the... Right now, if there are some accents, what's more important is the leading factor is the melody. So it's the bar. Count by bar. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Yeah. Continue. Only here a moment. Now go. Even more. All the way to here. And then restart. Thicker with the right hand. Forward. And 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2, 1. That's right. Because I think the 2 was cut short. Yeah. So I think that's very important. So to end, just a few small points. When you play this, careful that the left hand won't cover the... Sometimes your left hand covers a little bit. So counting more precisely these 2 bars. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1. Yeah, that's especially this one. All right. 1. It's so awkward that he didn't write fa bum. He writes da bum. It creates even more tension to have that sudden delay. And then other things about the sostenuto here also. You cut short the T, and then you went to... It was a little too collage, a bit too quick. Swing more with melodies when you play. It was too... A little 1, 2, 3, 1. To think 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. It's a bit more... Well, like... Yeah, if you want to stop there, yeah. And then the espressivo when you start. This very sad descending line, when you read espressivo, I think you need to make sure you find a sound that's more tender, more personal, closer to the key, and you give more into the key rather than this sudden diminuendo. There are 2 subjects. One is, and then there is that the secondary subject becomes a bit more prominent as a rhythmic figure as it moves along. And then, you know, what we spoke about, the leggero. That you move it gradually, in other words, you know, so start a bit more gentle, and then you have time to expand. Yeah, these are some of the it's a huge piece. One last thing I have to say, it's when you play, sorry, this, make sure you change the pedal because sometimes it's so fast. Sometimes you hear a little the black key remains there. That, and then otherwise you have a long, long dominant pedal that remains dirty. Right, so that's a spot that happens usually after a long pedal and an accent. So and then we think we want to be very quick with the foot, but it's too quick. It comes a little too early. Okay? Good. I'm so sorry. We have to stop here. Thank you. Yes, yes, yes.